All right. Well, Adam, Boaz, Becker, thank you so much for making time for our little show.
Thank you for having me.
So you talk about, how outrage and division are kind of a default responses to crises, and I really get that because that's something we talk about on this show a lot. But you've jumped right in to a pretty intense conflict talking about Israel and Palestine. So, how do you think media has sort of driven this amplified or amplified that reflexive tribalism aspect of our nature and that specific to that conflict?
Probably differently depending on which society you're in. I think Israelis have been consuming a very different type of like media landscape for a very long time, and as have the Palestinians and Americans too, right? And I feel like the way the media works is by interfacing with like their own psyche and with their own kind of like every society's narratives very differently, right? So for Jews in Israel, for example, you could just see this in the reaction to October 7th, right? Like on the day of October 7th, everyone began to say, oh, this is exactly like the Yom Kippur War. This is 1973 all over again. It's exactly 50 years after. This is what it feels like. And within about 24 hours, the analogies began to shift, and everybody just spoke about pogroms and the Holocaust. And that imagery hadn't stopped, right? So it's almost like in unison, either the media or Twitter or just the entire kind of like reflexive social mechanism ended up converging on a type of analogy that made sense for everybody. I imagine that something very similar is happening on the Palestinian side too. They had in their mind faced centuries of oppression by foreign conquerors, right? By crusaders, by the British colonialists, by European interventionists. And then they see the Jews immigrating to Palestine. And within a few years, it's clear that these are just the latest manifestation of the crusaders yet again, right? And so at some point, I feel like each society ends up locking onto some set of analogies, and the rest of the media ecosystem, either deliberately or through some type of trial and error and some random walk, is detecting those memes that are very likely to simply lock into place. And I think you have different products and different technologies that can help to like accelerate that type of identification of which meme is going to be the one that sort of like that conquers the minds of these listeners. And different products and different technologies do this differently. But I think this has been a process that's been going on in the case of Israel, Palestine, probably since the 20s, of just like a cycle of fear followed by propaganda that leads to more fear and propaganda and fear and propaganda.
So this is one of those conversations that feels like this could be the direction we go in for the next X amount of time here because um, that is super interesting, and I totally relate to that. This idea and I see a push pull in this idea of capturing these memes or riding the wave of these memes as well, right? Because the media sometimes thinks they create these things, but sometimes they're just riding a wave of a meme that's out there. But then they are amplifying it typically because they've sort of picked a side in some sense and think that's the one that's going to work, and that can cause that to drive. And I think that's a very complicated landscape for even less divisive issues. I mean, a lot of issues. But now when you say it's going to be about Gaza and Israel Palestine, this is a whole new level. And and that's but I think that same idea applies across a lot of topics, and it's a very interesting idea that I really like it, and it is a question like, what's your sense of that push pull? I mean, I guess it varies with each topic a little bit, but I mean, it seems like the media has influence in it, but they're also riding waves from other sources that have already occurring down, maybe boots on the ground or you know,
That's right. Or Twitter. That's
well, or
right.
Twitter, yeah.
Well, because like I feel like like even in the 80s or 90s, even early 2000s, I think that some of the people that are getting platformed today in the news channels in Israel, and I imagine the exact same things happening in the US, would never have gotten an audience back in the day. But now it's like they can't not host these people. They can't not platform them because they already have massive following on social media. And so now it's almost like traditional media is just strong armed into giving credible space to people who would otherwise have zero credibility. So I feel like it goes both ways. I feel like there's more and more resentment and frustration with how traditional media is done. And there's more of a subversive kind of grassroots approach to propagating these memes and these ideas. And then traditional media has to somehow bend in some bizarre shape to accommodate that. So yeah, I think there's definitely a push and pull. I think in Israel it probably functions quite differently because the news culture there feels so pervasive. It feels like it's everywhere. Like you get in the car, it's 6:25. You say, okay, well, let's play some music for 5 more minutes because at 6:30 there's going to be the news, and at 8 there's going to be the news. At every 30 minutes there's going to be the news, and so everybody's always orbiting around that schedule, right? And then this is what you do. The whole family gets together, 8 p.m., 9 p.m., 10 p.m., whatever. You turn on the news, and everybody's just glued to the TV, and it's like the news is just imbuing and installing a particular mood and a particular climate everywhere. And it's all pervasive. I don't think it's quite like that in the US. I think in the US, first of all, most people are probably not at all plugged into the news, right? I think probably the biggest divide is between people who care about the news and consume it and those that don't. And then within the people that care about the news, that's where you probably see a very wide ideological polarization. Is that right? Is that your intuition?
Yeah, that's what the sort of statistics on this show, that most of us that sit here and worry about, news's influence and worry about misinformation stuff are just kind of forgetting that like the vast majority of people don't care about
Yeah.
the news at all. Like they aren't consuming any news. Now, they kind of are because they're typically using social media, and social media is recasting oftentimes traditional media stuff, right? I mean, what did Jen Psaki say this last night or whatever, and that gets reset through those other channels, but they don't actively participate in the news, and they think they don't care about it, even though it probably is affecting them more than they think. But yeah, it's a funny world that we live in because we're over here really concerned about journalism and all that, and then it's like no one else even cares.
Yeah, they don't care. And it's amazing to me how, like, when I would speak with friends who were, let's say, like very supportive of Trump, and I would tell them about some of my own kind of concerns. They had never heard these concerns in their life. They'll be like, "Oh, I didn't know he did. Oh, I didn't. I had no clue." They lived in a completely different universe, in a completely different information bubble, and the exact same thing is happening that I detect on the Israeli-Palestinian side. It isn't necessarily the case that the Israelis don't have a narrative that is compelling. That might also be true, but that's not the reason why many people who are critical of Israel are critical of Israel. It's not because they have heard the arguments and heard the narratives and found them not to be effective. It's they've never even heard them in the first place, or they heard a caricature of them. And the exact same thing is happening on the other side. Most Israelis had never actually confronted genuine criticism that is valid from the Palestinians' perspectives. And so it's not like their experience has been one of just constant ideological confrontation. No, it is just complete ideological homogeneity.
Hmm. Yeah, and social media certainly makes that easier to do, and sort of if you let the algorithms pull you, that it'll draw you there more than if you were to be more of an active participant. Um, something I wanted to talk about with this topic as well is that with any topic, you find that we we don't we talked a little bit before we started recording that about this idea of if you have these cross-cutting ideas, you're sort of disliked by everybody, right? Everybody's after you because you don't agree quite with this about with your tribe about that, and you appear to be an enemy over here, and that's true of all kinds of issues. And but from my perspective, what I see when people think about the Israeli-Palestinian debate is it's like a minefield, and a lot of people that may think they want to express like a cross-cutting idea, maybe they're just absolutely terrified to do it, right? And you talk about that idea that that's a blocker, right? We're so agitated or traumatized. Maybe you can talk about that a little bit because with this conflict, I see that I feel it. Like it's a minefield that I'm leery of walking in, right?
I feel it every day. Honestly, every day I speak to my mom, it's like this. I think my mom, I grew up with my mom being on the left, very pro peace, very pro dialogue. That had always been her disposition. After October 7th, if there's anything that Hamas does or that the Palestinians do, it's almost like inevitably it's going to be parsed in the most cynical light. She's like, "Ah, did you? I spoke to her last night. She goes like, "Ah, did you see what they did with that thing?" And I was like, yeah. And she's like, and what do you think about it? And I was like, well, wait. Do you mean that you think that they did this, they did X because of Y? And she's like, why else would they do it? And it's almost like trust had eroded to such an extent that she wouldn't feel comfortable with herself if she gave a less than cynical interpretation for the other side. And I don't know what to make of it. I don't know how to explain this, but it might just be like, folks who study psychology, maybe that is just a reflection of trauma. But it's almost like in her mind, and she confessed to it because I asked her, I was like, maybe she feels there's so much pain right now that it's expensive mentally to have a picture in her mind that the other side isn't pure evil. It's like the picture of the other side that is not just monstrosity is too expensive, like mentally, to maintain. And so it's just easier to either deny or reject or just be deluded, right, by the actual reality. It could be that the reality is that the other side is always monsters. Maybe that's, give it some probability. But chances are they're less bad than you imagine, right? Maybe they're more bad than you wish, but they're less bad than you imagine. And that's probably true across conflicts. And it's just think about it like this. Like if you ask most Israelis today about, what are the worst things that happened on October 7th, they'll tell you a few things. We don't have to get into the details. They'll say, like 1, 2, 3, and 4. And if you tell them, actually, I think number 2 didn't quite happen in that way, and here's some compelling evidence, they don't want. It's almost like they don't want number 2 not to have happened. Why? Why is that? I don't know. But I feel like it's when I engage in these conversations, I feel like they feel so attacked, and they feel like the need is to defend themselves and the tribe because everybody around them is attacking them, that they simply can't take the risk of there being anybody from within that is going to weaken them because they feel like they can't be any weaker.
Yeah, from all the experts we've had on here, that's part of it. I think the other piece that is that our brains are just you talked about this concern about it's too much for our brains to handle. It's too much to handle cognitively, and that's a big piece of it as well, right? Like we like things to be sort of nice, simple buckets that we can kind of we don't have to think about it anymore. We've already dropped it in that bucket. Don't make me think about it again.
Mhm.
You know?
Yeah, the problem is that and this the argument that I'm trying to make for these people is that even to understand your enemy better is a good idea. Just
Right.
fine. They're your enemy. They're trying to kill. Okay, fine. But how are they trying to kill you? And why exactly? Don't you want to know? Isn't it in your interest to try to understand it? Just from your own self-preservation perspective. Shouldn't you try to do this? No. It's almost like they're okay sacrificing themselves rather than open their mind a little bit to the possibility things might be a little bit different because then it will protect them. And I feel like of all the different arguments, that is an argument that has worked decently well with people. They're like, you know what? Okay, I feel like I should understand the other side better. I need to understand my enemy because otherwise I'm asleep at the wheel. So let me do that. You know what? I'll engage in these conversations. I'll speak to the Gazans. I'll speak to the West Bank Palestinians because I need to understand exactly how they think so that I can protect myself. Even that's progress by my lights.
Right. Yeah, we experience the same thing here a lot. I was like, I was just feeling you while you were saying all that because, and one thing we talk about also along those lines is like we're not in the business of persuading, but a lot of people want to do that or think they want to do that. And if you are an advocate for a side, you're going to be a better advocate if you understand the other person's cares and concerns, right? If you're not speaking to their concerns, they're not going to think what you're saying is important to them, and they're not going to do anything about it. So, like you say, it's in your own best interest to know that, and that's one thing. But again, another thing underlying this that I often see is somehow we have a hard time sort of simultaneously opening up or giving space. We see it as a betrayal to give space to the other side to even tell their story, right? Their side of the story. We see that as like we're like you said, we're not righteous in our tribe, and we're being somehow disloyal to
That's right.
our sentiment here. And also, there's like a fear. It's like a weird fear, or there's like an idea that somehow if I let them say this stuff, well, then I'm going to have to change my mind. It's like, no, you don't have to change your mind. I mean, you might want to be open to changing your mind, but even if you're not open, it's still okay. You can still like listen to them and not change your mind. Those two
That's
things
right.
don't necessarily go together.
Yeah, I think there is again, even here, there's like trauma. I think that Israeli society feels the trauma of having tried it. In their mind, they tried it during Oslo and it blew up in their faces. And so like now they don't want to try this anymore. Like why? We've tried, we listened, we made concessions. That's how they see it, right? Forget about what you think happened or didn't happen, but
Right.
they that's how they see themselves. And they think that if you this is why I think many of these like pro conversation efforts I think have failed to gain scale. The reason they failed to gain scale is because nobody wants this. Not enough people want this, right? They don't want this because you sound like a traitor who's trying to get them blown up again. And by their lights, their experience has all validated this. So they're not necessarily wrong to be suspicious. I think they're right to be suspicious. If you go to the Israelis today and tell them, oh, don't you want to be compassionate and empathetic and try to listen to the other? We need to kill the other side right now. You understand? Like that's what we need to do. And I suspect that that is the sentiment shared by Palestinians. Sometimes we say that the one thing uniting Israelis and Palestinians today is that both of them hate peace activists, right? Like,
Right.
unfortunately, that's it's a little tongue in cheek, but there is a truth to it. If the way that you appeal to these people is, don't you want to change your mind? Don't you want to open your mind? Don't you want to open your heart? You lost them. You lost the conversation before you even started.
Yeah, I mean, a parallel I would say here is that the only thing Republicans and Democrats agree on is they don't want a third party.
Yeah, that's right. I think it's so one thing that we've been trying to do is just almost uh, over-index on the Israeli-Palestinian case right now because I
Right.
think it is paradigmatic in certain ways, and then we'll refine and improve our muscles into having how exactly to have these conversations and how to position ourselves and frame the appeal so that people want to have these conversations on a very difficult topic and then come and do the exact same thing on American politics. So that's kind of like the trajectory, right? So the idea is let's just start with a very divisive and polarizing topic. I see the Israelis and the Palestinians as a single society deeply polarized. I don't see them necessarily as two very different societies because they depend on one another. They're going to be inextricably linked for a very long time. So, yeah, they're not really going to split. They're incredibly polarized. And there's obvious language barriers right now that don't really exist in American society. But then again, I also think that language barriers do exist in American society. It might just be not at the level of which words you're using, but what they mean. And so there's a translation solution to both of them that can exist sort of like across the scale of what we mean by language.
Well, another thing that all these conflicts have in common is they all have humans involved and we all share these same psychological traits. So that's another aspect where that's why we find a lot of the conflict resolution stuff we see, kind of being applied to the U.S. situation originally came from somewhere else in the world, through some of these other conflicts in the world. So let's move to the innovation a little bit. So you've got this idea, basically a tool, if I understand it right, that helps, you know, you use this language of meeting people where they are, and I love that. So I want to kind of drive on that, find out a little bit more what you mean by that. Um, and so walk us through a little bit about this platform and how it works, maybe to help conversations drive towards understanding as opposed to winning.
Yeah, so I think we really have to meet people where they are, and I think there's a lot of people that might be open to just having conversations so that they can understand the other side better, but not enough of those people, right? So we have to start with those people. That's fine, but how much of society is that? I don't know, 1%, 2%, 5% at most. I don't think you're going to get very large numbers here, right? You're trying to get to a billion people. How do we get to a billion people? Right? So to get to a billion people, we have to have slightly different appeals depending on what motivates people. And it could be the case that what motivates people is like, very intellectual conversations, very philosophical conversations. Fine. If that's the case, we're creating space for you. And the appeal would be one way. If all you want to do is come and fight and just do a slam dunk on your political opponents and be the next Ben Shapiro or whatever, and a lot of people want that, there should also be a space for you. That's fine. Some people want to engage in that style of conversation, and we have to be able to create a space for them. Again, I think the problem right now isn't that the conversations that we're having them badly. We're just not having conversations. So I feel like the number one problem to solve is how do you even get people into the same room in the first place, virtually, physically, whatever. Right? So that's kind of what I mean by meet people where they are. We have to appeal to them in different ways. If you want to come in and look, when I sometimes we put up posts in like the Arab world, sometimes in Israel, and we can have posts that say just come and do a slam dunk on Zionists, and a lot of people sign up. If that's what it takes to get them to come and speak to Zionists, I'll take it. I'll take it. It's progress. You know what I mean? Even that's
Hmm.
progress. In the U.S., for example, there's like a spin. A lot of Jewish Americans might want to hear from Gazans. Come and ask a Gazan a question. Okay, well, if that's the appeal, I'll appeal to you like this. So I just feel like we have to pick whichever appeal is going to bring the most people, and then just keep creating a space that is flexible enough to accommodate lots of different types of conversations. So that's kind of what we're creating. We're creating a digital space. I kind of think about it as like the next generation social media, right? The idea is that we need a social platform that isn't driving us towards outrage. Although I think rage might still be necessary to appeal to. If people are driven by a sense of rage right now, I want to appeal to that rage. Fine, no problem. But insofar as there is a space that can, then first of all, I think there's like a few different elements that you can play with in order to make sure that conversations are had much more civilly. One of them is to take out text. So we don't believe in text. We believe in very minimal text. I believe text, by and large, is radicalizing technology. A conversation that is audio, ideally even video, if people turn on, many Palestinians, sometimes they fear it, so they keep the video off. Others turn on their video. Immediately, everybody moderates. It's like, I don't even need to do anything else. I just put them in a room, I let them talk, and immediately it moderates. And not just that, the fact that I've appealed to them by saying, this is a space you can come in. If you want to be aggressive, yalla, go for it. The fact that I do this means that all of a sudden, in their mind, this is not fake. This is real. I can actually speak about real things here. And they feel it. And so they go right into the heart of it without any of like the bullshit politeness. They go to the heart of it. And they actually make progress this way. So I think there's just a few different kind of like product and like feature changes. Just restrict text, introduce audio and video, and frame it in a particular way around confrontation. And it's okay to confront people right now. It's fine. Then all of a sudden, everything changes. We have a community that is growing and people are there and they're engaged and they're asking questions. And the secret sauce here is that we have an AI, and it's a set of AI agents that are behind the scenes listening in on these conversations. And through various tactics, they try to sway them towards healthier and more productive places. And so that could be like even just listening to what somebody's saying and summarizing it back to them. By the way, did you mean this? Things that sometimes we get so, in the heat of the moment, we can't do it ourselves because you're already ready with the next comeback. No, the AI now slowed you down. Just hold on for a moment. This is what this person said. Does everybody agree? Does everybody understand what they just said? That's what they said. Now let's move on. So anyway, we're creating like a platform for lots of different types of conversational experiences that ideally can cater to different types of audiences and different segments for different topics with an AI that is optimizing the experience depending on who the person is and what they need.
Interesting. I mean, I'm sitting here thinking about all the real world examples of. I participate in a number of these kind of conversation organizations that organize various conversations. I'm a trained moderator for one called Crossing Party Lines, and I'm thinking about the real world, participants that come into some of these conversations sometimes, right? I mean, you sometimes get the soapbox folks, right, that kind of just try to dominate the conversation that way. Um, but you get these other dynamics. And as a moderator, obviously you're trying to do the least amount of sort of pushing things around. You're mostly just trying to give an even amount of everybody sort of a chance to express their views. And then if anybody really gets, hostile or something like that, then you step in as well. Um, and it sounds like, well, and I don't say another thing about like looking at I thought about another thing while you were talking there too. And I think these two things all relate. That's why I'm bundling it together. Is that think there's been a lot of studies on some of these prompts and things like that you can do to try to, in this case, deal with say misinformation. And one of the most effective prompts was simply to say, quality information, it's not exactly right, but something along these lines. Quality information is really important, or it's really important to share factual information, something like that. It wasn't biased. It wasn't saying you're wrong. It didn't say your stuff was wrong. And it applies to anybody, whatever your place on the political spectrum. So it didn't trigger a lot of that. And it was actually really effective at I think my theory, I don't know if this was really found in the study. My theory on that is that it enabled people a little bit of time to engage this kind of system one, system two thinking, right? It sort of gave you a little bit of time to engage that more cognitive process rather than, staying in sort of system one, intuitive, reactive kind of mode. So I'm curious to see now. I've said all that stuff. So now, tell me how you think that fits with the thousands of conversations that you've facilitated, or your system has facilitated.
Yeah, so it's very interesting that you say that you're talking about moderation. So I don't see the AI as a moderator primarily. I think that the AI is simply helping to create the space and the environment and the atmosphere for healthy conversations to take place. If people want to yell, if people can do whatever they want to do, but the AI is very subtly kind of like introducing more and more and more activity into those conversations. So, for example, if somebody is very quiet, let's say these are conversations, so there's 5 or 6 people in the room. Somebody doesn't say anything for a long time. The AI could check in with that person alone and just be like, by the way, you haven't been saying anything. Do you feel like you have the right space to jump in? And if not, okay, do you want to raise your hand? You can raise your hand. So it can just very subtly kind of engage with people. And so the idea is for it to be non-intrusive in the conversation. And some of the ways it can do it is almost just by like, think about it like the AI is sharing its screen. So people are talking and the AI is just doing its own thing. So you can click into a tab of just map and you see what the AI is doing, how it's parsing the conversation. And it's interpreting it in the visual manner. And it's creating almost like a semantic conceptual diagram of all the different issues and the positions and the arguments that people are saying. And that's it. It just shows this. This is what you guys are talking about. And the fact that it's showing this, I think, is already game changing. Because people are like, oh, wow, so we've opened a bunch of different threads. We actually haven't even begun to touch any one of these, right? And we just keep opening threads and we're just jumping around. The AI could open a new node and say, by the way, nobody's been actually addressing any one of these things. Just letting you know. and that's it. So people could sort of like choose to engage with it however they want, but we know how they're likely to engage with it in different ways. That being said, I get a lot of feedback from people who say things like, the AI should have corrected that person when they made a mistake. The AI should do more to like defend my argument because I'm right and they're wrong. Why isn't the AI bringing up this fact? Why isn't AI? Everybody wants this, especially the younger people. They want the AI to do all of the hard work for them. They want the AI to be the source of truth here. And on our end, we're very skeptical of that. Even getting into fact-checking business, I'm very skeptical of that. I think that the AI should help to encourage people to think critically, but it shouldn't have a semantic and ideological bent. It shouldn't even have a point of view that is anything but methodological. It should just say, getting evidence is better than not getting evidence. Did you analyze this evidence correctly? Do you feel like you've analyzed it critically? Great. Show us some evidence of that. That's it. It doesn't, because think about it now. Right now we're doing Israel-Palestine. Tomorrow we're going to do flat Earth. We have a bunch of people that are coming. They're saying the Earth is flat. Others are saying the Earth is round. If the AI says, actually the Earth is round, I lost everybody. Now I lost all the flat Earth people. I need them. So it can't actually have an ideological point of view. Not even for fact checking. Think about it. I mean, how can it do fact? I don't know how it can do fact checking yet. Somebody says the Palestinians were expelled in 1948. Which Palestinians? The Jaffa Palestinians, the Haifa Palestinians, the Ramla Palestinians? Each one of them had a different experience. So what does that mean? How should I do a fact checking here? Now the AI could perhaps come and introduce more context. That's great. But even then I'm skeptical. Which source?
Right.
I don't know. I don't know. So I have to take a step back here and I have to say, you know what the AI can do? The AI can listen to a conversation, understand what people are saying, and perhaps play with the existing concepts that people had introduced in the conversation, almost like thought experiments. That's what AI can do well. AI is good with stories. It can parse the narratives that are driving certain people. It can reflect the premises that are driving certain arguments. It can do a good job at that. I don't want it to now start giving in facts.
Right. Well, and I was thinking, that one thing that what I was really intrigued by about that idea that one of the most effective interventions was simply to say facts are important. Essentially, facts, quality information is important, facts are important, or I should say, being accurate is important. It was something like that. So it's not partisan or anything like that. But what it tells me from that, because it was effective, meaning that it lowered the temperature of the conversation, it means that we do have the skills. We didn't have to learn new skills. So, we often talk about critical thinking as a challenge, and you kind of have to learn it. It's not an innate human trait. We have to actually practice it. But at the same time, if that intervention worked, then I guess we have some of those skills, right? Because it improved the conversation just by pointing out that fact. And I was thinking, some of the stuff, I don't know if these are things you've done as well, but, if it was a prompt back to me, if I'm the speaker or thinking about speaking, and I start just rattling off a lot of facts, I mean, maybe that's an opportunity to, not to question my facts, but just to remind me that sometimes storytelling works better than facts or something like that.
Totally, 100%, both in real time and after the fact. So right now we built a new tab in your profile for just, this is an analysis of your speech. This is the stuff that you do well. This is the stuff you could improve on. Here are some ideas, that sort of thing. So after the fact, after every conversation, and then in aggregate, how has your speaking improved over the last few conversations? It looks like you're asking more questions. Previously, you used to make more statements. That's interesting. Even subtle things like that. It seems like you're always taking over the conversation. You're just bulldozering over everybody else. That seems to be the case. Perhaps something to keep an eye out for. Subtle things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like it. Now, I've thought about this kind of idea with AI a lot. Like we often hear all the sort of bad, scary parts of where AI could go and how it could do all these terrible things or makes things worse and all this kind of stuff. And those are all kind of true, but we very seldom hear these stories about, well, we could apply AI for good. Like there are ways to apply AI for good. And I think a lot of people haven't haven't seen as much of people proposing those kind of ideas because there's more of the fear mongering and everything else out there. And I did a few episodes in a thing I call Outrage Science Bites where I talked about some of those. But yeah, I think and it was surprising to hear people, oh, I never heard anybody get with an idea like that. Yeah, because it's not out there in the news media. But so
And also, I think for good, I mean, I do think we should be extremely vigilant because if you ask me, chances are AI is going to make things much, much worse in terms of polarization, right? And I imagine that those are the things that you had touched on. But it's like, I think I'd give that maybe 85% chance. 85% chance our echo chambers will thicken, our filter bubbles will thicken. It's going to be even more difficult and we'll feel even more self-righteous. Because if right now what happens is, I'm on Facebook or on TikTok or whatever, and I just like watch videos that other people had created that the algorithm thinks I would like. Right now, we're going to move towards a situation where the feed is generated for me to make me feel good, to cater to all of my biases perfectly well. Right? This is just a recipe for getting into the matrix. If we can't
right.
speak to people right now, there's no way you'll be able to speak to people then. So I feel like it's likely to be a disaster. So I'm very worried about it. That being said, I think it's also possible that AI can make things much, much better. And if we're going to do it, now is the time to do it before things go, too far. And while AI is still ours to modify.
Yeah, I mean, somebody's got to try to use it for good, right? So I wanted to ask, how are you deciding, like, how will you know, how do you recognize success in these conversations? Like, what are your benchmarks? What are you looking for that you'd say, it's working better or it's working worse?
So there's at the level of a conversation, and then there's more globally. So ultimately, I want to get to millions of conversations, right? So this is the goal, to have millions of people constantly having conversations and getting relationships out of those conversations. And I feel like that's much easier to track than even just did they change their mind. Right now, I ask people, did they change their mind? The AI is asking, oh, did you find that argument compelling? It could do things like this. So right now, we have a lot of people they're filling in these surveys before they join these conversations and then after each one of those conversations. And you see reliably everybody moderates. Everybody moderates. How do I do this at scale? I don't know if I could serve surveys to millions of people at scale. But if I could track that now they're having relationships with people on the other side, and they're even having more conversation with people on the other side, I'm happy with that. Right? So my goal isn't for them to find common ground necessarily. I think that will be an emergent outcome.
Right.
But what we have to solve for is just getting more time face to face with people you disagree with.
Right. Right. And just experience with it. I mean, it's almost like, we talk about a lot of these skills, whether I'm driving a race car or I'm doing a podcast, it's like seat time. We need seat time in these conversations.
That's right. We need seat time. And it's fascinating. I mean, many Israelis have never had that. Many Palestinians have never had that with the other side. We have people that have never spoken to Jews before. We had people who've never spoken to Palestinians before. It's not easy, honestly, to find Jews and Arabs and Palestinians in particular to have conversations with. How do you go about it? It's not that easy. There isn't a single place where you can actually do it reliably in a healthy manner. It's you have to work quite hard to discover that. So in those societies, I mean, even in Israel, yes, Israel has 20% of its citizens are Arabs, and many of them consider themselves to be Palestinians. But they're not integrated in the way that you would wish, right? So it's not like they're actually having those types of conversations. They don't. And so even the linguistic and cognitive muscles that you need to have to develop in order to have these conversations successfully, they don't have that. And I feel like it's very clear. You see a lot of the messaging that Israelis push out to the rest of the world. It's like, you're just tone deaf. Are you not hearing how it sounds? They don't hear how it sounds. They've never gotten pushback in their society. In the US, it's very different. You can have Israelis, you can have Palestinians, they could be best friends. This is much more common in the US. Over there, in some of these societies, it's much more difficult. But even in the US now, like Democrats and Republicans, how often are those friends? Probably less and less, right? It's not that easy, even for me to find. I think I might have a handful of Friends who are Trump supporters, probably not even a handful. You know, I have to work pretty hard to find them. Things like Braver Angels, was useful in that. So
Right. Well, I'm glad you mentioned, common ground isn't necessarily a first order outcome you're looking for. Because, one of the things, the holy grail for a lot of people is somehow I'm going to convince all these people that my way is the right way and we're all going to get it. And that's how we solve polarization is we just all think the same way. Whereas, a lot of we talk about here is like, common ground's great when you can find it, but there's also peaceful coexistence, right? And learning how to coexist with folks that see the world differently, and and getting used to that, like making that like being comfortable with that, like that's a reality we're going to live in. Like we're not going to convince neither side is going to convince everyone on the other side to think exactly like they do. We're going to live in this world where people have different perspectives, and we have to get better at like seeing that as a reality we have to live in without either hunkering down in our bubbles or are just constantly at war with each other. So I think that's something that I struggle with trying to communicate to listeners here, because even people that say they're sort of fed up with the vitriol, but my answer is to convince them to think properly,
yeah,
and that winning an argument is the way to do that. And I don't exactly know the answer to get I just keep preaching the same things over and over and hope it lands at some point.
yeah,
That and I often talk about how even when you win, you lose. When you if you go like a flat earther, for instance, right? So if you bring me a bunch of facts about flat Earth,
mm,
and even if those facts are right, you're not going to change my worldview on that, right? You're not
yeah,
likely to change my worldview on that because we don't see those facts the same way. We don't have the same motivations,
that's right.
and but we can still peacefully coexist, right? You're not probably not going to change my mind on it. I'm not going to change your mind on it. Maybe I will, but that's not my goal. It doesn't necessarily need to be my goal either. But this idea that I can just rattle off a bunch of facts, and as soon as you know these facts, you'll see the light.
That's right. Yeah, no, I think that's right. It's very interesting. So I have this intuition. I don't know if anybody's done research on this, but from some of the conversations we've had, I see that people that change their mind, I don't know if it's because of certain arguments, but it might have to do with the quality of the relationships that they've been building. And the quality, I think, is a function of frequency and variety. That's kind of my intuition. It's like, oh, now it's like this is not just a one-off. They see this person every Tuesday. They come for our 8 p.m. call. Boom. Now it's just weekend wake out, weekend wake. They see the same face, and sometimes we talk about Israel Palestine, but sometimes we drift into talking about like Trump and the American politics and the woke left or whatever. And then we swing back to Israel Palestine, and then it's just a side conversation about sex and relationships and what's it like to date in Gaza. You're like, geez, all right. I guess now we're walking back. Now we're talking about dating apps, and now we're back into like 67 and the 67 borders and war, right? So I feel like it's like all of a sudden within the course of a relationship, you've just covered a lot of ground. And at the end of that, I see people just changing their mind radically. In moderation. Everybody's just like, I guess we could live with that. And I'm also not convinced, just like to the last point that you were making about the need for coexistence with these narratives. I'm not convinced that really what should happen is that the Israelis should all adopt the Palestinian narrative. Palestinians are unlikely to all become ardent Zionists. That's not going to happen, right? They see the Zionists as colonialists. I get it. Zionists, Jews in Israel, they see Palestinians as anti-Semites. I get it, right? It's easy for each of these sides to see the other in that light. Easy, right? But it could be that the way out isn't even a shared narrative, but it is a narrative. Each society gets its own narrative, but it's a kind of narrative that can allow for coexistence with the other's narratives. And I feel like it is very difficult cognitively to go through that kind of like story iteration, but I think it'll be much easier for AI to do that.
Hmm.
So I'm very curious. So right now, like our AI is not just trying to detect solutions and interesting stories that are novel, that can facilitate coexistence. It's slowly trying to contribute its own ideas and just throw those into the mix and have people engage with them.
I could see people getting nervous about that, seeing it as like it's manipulation and it's indoctrination of some sort.
But it's explicit, right? It's just, it's like it's on a chart. This is a list of ideas that the AI came up with. You could choose to engage with it. You could choose not to. You could choose to. What is likely to happen is maybe collectively, maybe this is how you find some common ground. Israelis and Palestinians collectively hate all of the AI's ideas.
Right. Yeah, we can bind together on that. Um, when you were talking about that there, I thought about something else. I think AI could potentially play a role, and I'm curious to hear about it. Like we know there's lots of evidence about this. There's lots of science on this that, we've mentioned this a few times that, storytelling is much more persuasive than, sort of rattling off facts. But, the funny thing is we keep telling people that with the fact that storytelling is more effective than, and what we find, I talked to David Helfand on the show, and he was talking about how basically science kind of needs a marketing team, right? I mean, they're just not very good about uh, particularly selling ideas be outside other academics, right? I mean, with academics, the facts work. Like you give that factual story, and then it tends to be persuasive, right? But for the general population, that's not the way it works. Um, and and so that seems like a thing AI could help with. Like here's a narrative that maybe is could be a compelling narrative for that for your same position that you're trying to sell with facts, and just teach us more about storytelling maybe, because this is what's lacking now. I hear so many scientists talking about this, but nobody's answering the question, well, how do I do storytelling?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. I thought that for many years now, I think that what is crucially missing from the Israel-Palestine discourse are like poets. Just people to give us more stories, interesting stories of how the future can unfold, even just to give us some input so that we can build vision. We have no vision. No one has vision in this space. And it's so difficult to be imaginative in this space. So let alone how to even articulate a story. What should a story even give me some examples of stories? People have very bad stories here. And I think it's almost like their imagination module in their brain is just shut off because of fear and violence and the conditions of the region. But AI is somewhat detached from that. So I think it already does. Like, so I asked it a bunch of questions, like, give me some creative solutions to the conflict, right? It comes up with all sorts of interesting things. What are some like shared narratives that you think Israelis and Palestinians could get behind? It keeps, every time I ask it questions like this, it keeps orbiting around the city of Hebron and the tomb of the patriarchs and the figure of Abraham as the unifying figure. It could bring everybody together. And how can you turn Hebron into some form of example of, like, Hebron right now is in the West Bank, and kind of like deeply sectioned off, one for the Jewish community and the other for the Arab Palestinian community, and with checkpoints within it and surveillance, and it's rough for everybody. How can you turn Hebron into something that is a bit more aspirational? The AI came up with that. I was like, that's interesting, just as a flashpoint in what could be. So anyway, more of that is what I hope for AI. There's another idea that I spoke to a Palestinian friend of mine, and he told me about a Jewish friend of his who went to Israel. And this is her first time in Israel. She's a Jewish woman from America. She went to Israel. She got in a taxi cab in Ben Gurion, and the driver was a Palestinian Arab. And she started to freak out. She doesn't, in her bubble, she can't, what is he going to do to her, And fortunately for her, she was there with another passenger in the car. And they were driving, but at some point that passenger was let off. And it was just her and the driver, and she began to have a panic attack. And at some point, the driver realized it. So he pulls over, right? And he goes to her, and he's like, look, you're going to be okay. Like, here's some water, like, I'll be your protector here, right? I'll guard you. Don't worry. There's nothing bad that can happen. And he told me that there's almost this, I don't know if it's a narrative trick or psychological trick, where the idea is, how do we begin to see the other as our savior? Not just that we're not going to be each other's murderers. how do Jews see the Palestinians as their saviors? And how do Palestinians see the Jews as their saviors, their protectors? How do we drive towards something like this? You ask most Israelis and Palestinians, they can't go and reason in that way. This is way too abstract and far-fetched. What are you talking about, right? They're blowing up our buses today, right? Like they're shooting missiles to our houses today. But the AI doesn't have that baggage. So the AI asked those questions. It came up with all sorts of interesting imagery. It came up with it was like an IDF tank, like manned by a Palestinian, killing Nazis. All sorts of crazy things like that. You know what I mean? Like protecting the Jews from the Nazis with the IDF tank. I don't know. I feel like there's just an avenue for creativity that we've tapped with Gen AI technology, and I figure we just have to squeeze it for what it's worth.
Hmm. So we've touched on it a little bit. You touched on that AI might make polarization worse. But also there's the challenge we've also touched on a little bit that people tend to distrust it or think, it's biased against me or my people or my side or my tribe. What safeguards, do you have in place to maybe avoid sort of reinforcing biases or, for people maybe to continue to have some trust in what the AI is saying?
I think it really depends on what AI feature we're talking about. And so I feel like we'll have to kind of zoom in to the details. Um, because, you know what I mean? Otherwise, it's like each AI feature has its own vulnerabilities. So even honestly, even just like a very small, even just something that seems very trivial, like summarize the conversation, could be fraught with so much liability. Even just something as simple as that, which is why we're still in the early days of this whole Gen AI thing, right? Even something like transcribing a conversation. So, for example, somebody is saying, and this is why I think it's a really good idea that we're starting with a particular vertical like Israel-Palestine. Somebody could be saying IDF. Most transcribing kind of like audio to text language models or models could interpret this as idea of, not IDF, idea of, because how often do people say IDF? They don't say it all that often, right? So now you're like, okay, idea of. Immediately it picked up a few different things, totally like misunderstood it, now misunderstood the message, misunderstood it, gave you a summary, it was totally off. You're like, this is not good, right? Even worse, accents. I had a guy say the other day something about I read the transcript and it said the Azerite, as in Azerite. Azerite. What is Azerite? Is that like an ancient peoples of the Canaan, the Azerites? And I was like, oh no, it was a Jordanian Palestinian saying Azerite, but with their accent, it came out as Azerite. We have to now fine tune these models even so that they can get the words correctly, right? And now once you get the words correctly, now let's see if even the summary is correct. So there's a lot of different ways to fix each one of these, right? So for the transcription, right now we're just creating our own data sets where we actually have people who listen to many of these things and say, no, this is correct, this is not correct, this is correct, this is not correct. And when it doesn't understand something correctly, the AI right now spits out a probability. So I think Azerite got like a 45% probability. It's not very high. It doesn't trust that it got the right answer. So in that case, the AI should just ask the conversation again. You said Azerite. I don't understand that. Can you repeat that? What did you mean by this? So I feel like what the AI should do is constantly confess its own ignorance as often as possible and give people the opportunity to correct it and to inform it. So if the users are constantly providing feedback about what the AI is doing right and wrong, I feel like at least we have some type of flag we can come in and investigate. That also opens the door to other vulnerabilities. Because people can now, just say, no, actually, it didn't summarize it right because it still made it seem like you're two sides saying a thing. No, it should be my side versus the other side. There's a lot of open problems for us to figure out. So I don't know. I think a lot of this is going to be like open questions and open research for a long time.
Hmm.
But yeah, each one of these things, ideally, we establish very clear benchmarks. And every innovation and iteration with respect to the AI needs to score pretty well on these benchmarks. I think the other problem, though, is going to be metrics that we don't even know to track yet because they're going to be emergent metrics that only show up after the fact. So, for example, it could be the case that, we say AI's job is to get people who disagree to speak for longer without hating each other more. Fine. If that's the goal of the AI, that's the goal of the AI. But what if it does that really well? And the way it does it is by constantly throwing in more conflict that doesn't quite boil over into hate, but it's just totally unnecessary. And now it invented a bunch of conspiracy theories to try to get people to discuss. Like at some point, we need to add even more mechanisms to make sure that it behaves properly. But we need to see what is all of the different pathologies of behavior before we start introducing those.
No, I know it's specific. It's more specific to the U.S. situation, but I don't know if you've looked into depolarizing GPT, I think it's called, by Steve McIntosh. Um, and he's like a develop. He's got this model or study of what he calls developmental philosophy, and what that it might be fun to play with because even though it's more on the red blue and the Republican and Democrat thing, it might be fun to play with a little bit. And I don't know if this will make it in the show or not, but what it does is you prompt like a regular chat GPT prompt, you give it something, and it gives you three answers. It gives you a sort of a far left answer. It gives you a far right answer, and then it doesn't give you a centrist answer. It gives what they call an integrated answer. So it's trying to integrate the values of both sides. And I wonder if there's some opportunity there to think about that integrated values model at all. And it might be something that you look at to play with a little bit. And I forget there's a data scientist that worked with Steve McIntosh on that, and I'm forgetting his name right now. But if you go to the website, his information is there.
I like that. I like that a lot. Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
it's
there's
interesting.
so much to do. There's so much to do in this space. In conversations in general, conversations about conflict, conversations about politics in particular. It's just endless space. So if people have, by the way, if anybody wants to come in and like test out some of these things, even within the context of our conversations, come and like play with the AI and see what happens, then we're certainly open to any type of collaboration.
Yeah, awesome. One of the challenges that you kind of hinted at it with the idea of the summary, right? And what are people going to think about the summary, and if it, does it seem biased when they hear the summary? And you also talked about that earlier. You talked also about just how we interpret the words themselves, and that's a big problem that we have. That use the same word, but people mean very different things by it, and that can create a lot of this kind of talking around each other kind of problem. Um, is there an opportunity there for the AI to maybe help, uh, maybe elaborate those definitions a little bit and see if people are on the same page or something like that?
1 billion%. I get that a lot. It's very interesting because I see that less as a feature of Israelis and Palestinians and more of Americans. So where they just like totally speak at like it's very interesting because even when we have conversations about Israel Palestine with Americans, oftentimes they would use words like colonialism, settler colonialism, like that would be part of the lexicon. For Palestinians, they say something very specific. This checkpoint right there in Kalkilia is upsetting me. I don't like it. Take it off. Why do I need this here? It's so much more concrete. And so it doesn't bubble up into very high level conceptual frameworks that then are bundled with so much connotation and baggage. It doesn't have to be like that. You could just zoom into the details because you know the details. If you don't know the details, then it's a lazy shorthand and you just use big words like colonialism. I think the
Right.
AI could just say, okay, just pause here for a minute. What exactly do you mean here? Let's just unpack it. We don't need this baggage. Just unpack it. What are you referring to? You could say that the West Bank is apartheid. You could make that case. But why if you could just describe the West Bank in its absolute detail? Just describe the detail. What you like and what you don't like about what's happening in the West Bank without using these big words like apartheid.
Yeah, and this gets us to a fundamental challenge we have too, because often we have kind of made a decision and we don't even aren't really too sure what facts or what is the basis for that decision, right? We just kind of live with it, we hold on to it. But if we had to explain it to ourselves, and that's a part of people talk about how you do these dialogues by continuing to ask those questions, like yeah, I don't know if you've run across street epistemology or sort of this idea of deep canvassing. That kind of thing can help bring out some of that. But most of us, when we actually have to go defend our position, we really don't have that much behind it. We just believe it, but we don't exactly know why. So let's talk a little bit about scaling. You talked about a little before. You want to scale this to like millions of conversations. So um, and for me, I would like to, a goal for me would be an outcome of this would be sort of strengthening social cohesion. And you talked about the idea of one, if there's a measurement towards, building building a relationship as
Yeah.
one of the measurements. And I think that is part of building that social
That's right.
cohesion. But so what do you think is going to take to scale it, or what do you already have plans, or where are you at with that?
We have plans. I can say what we're doing. I think just to kind of frame our thinking here, I think that American society, we have at least two big social problems. The first is polarization, right? Obviously, this is what we're talking about. But we also have a loneliness epidemic, right? And I don't think they're unrelated, those two, right? And I'm sure that you've explored in the show like the relationship between them. But I always thought that, well, maybe we could use one to solve the other. Could you use the fact that we're so polarized, right? Like polarization could be almost like a spring. You know what I mean? Like, is there some desire then to just kind of like snap back, or is there some type of impulse to like see what the other side is saying? Like, I feel like there might be something there, and insofar as there's any type of desire to have a like deeper and richer social life, perhaps we can leverage the fact that we're so polarized, right? And so I kind of think about this as a platform. While other social media tools, I see them as more communication. This, I see it more of like a platform for connection. This is where you actually go really deep. You know you're going to see these people again. And we have topics, we have conversations about a lot of different topics, and sometimes these conversations take a very long time. And so you end up building these connections, and I believe that that is fundamental to building a cohesive society, right? I mean, like we're so polarized right now. I mean, first there's the point that we are that it seems like we're more polarized than we are. But even that, I think, tends to lead to more polarization, right? So there's
Right.
like this like funny mirror image here that's at play. Yeah, I believe that insofar as you can build and strengthen these relationships across these divides, I feel that in and of itself can do a lot of good.
Oh, 100%. I mean, yeah, I mean, I think it's so true what you say about, and I love that that's a platform that you see this as a platform that way, because social media was sort of supposed to be that, and it's kind of the exact opposite of that. Like we're the most connected in some way we could ever be, but we're also the least connected. We're also more isolated and more lonely, and social media seems to only exacerbate that and make it worse rather than better. And I wrote a piece about this on my Substack a couple weeks ago, or maybe it was a month ago now, um, about this. And it's funny you mentioned dating apps earlier, because I sort of use dating apps as a model, or as a demonstration of this idea of kind of like we live in this like we buy our community connectivity, our community, our connectivity by we order it off a dating app,
Right.
almost the way we order, dinner of a food service, right? Um, and we're in this mode where we're always looking past the connection we have right in front of us, which I think you talked about with text. That gives us this opportunity. I'm looking for the next most interesting thing. Like I'm only going to give you so long before I'm already looking past you to the next thing, instead of finding that deeper connection with the person that's right in front of you right now.
Totally. No, we've like commodified relationships, and I think like this social media has helped with that. But I also think that what's happened as a result is we almost have like an implicit caricaturization of the other side. And even if we find a way to kind of intercept that trend, it would be useful. So when people say to me, oh, Palestinians, they're just trying to kill all the Jews. Well, let me just ask them. You could just go to a space. Oh, yeah, like Trump supporters, they're all racist. Well, let me just ask them. You just get on the place and just have a conversation with them. Are you guys driven by racism? No. Are you driven by xenophobia? No. Okay. Maybe they're not, or maybe they are. Like, whatever it is, I think we just need to know. But right now, I think what's happened, I think about it is almost like this is like the age of confirmation bias.
Yeah.
Whatever you think of the other side, you can find some lunatic who says that on YouTube. You know what I mean? So, and then you could use that as an example to then generalize to everybody else on that side. We need better mechanisms to kind of like break the monopoly of crazy on each other's sides.
Yeah, because there's this idea of what social media and the internet allows us to do is create these fragmented networks that are miles apart, right? So you can take one of these really narrow views, and it could be really narrow because it keeps getting narrower and narrower, and you can create a community around that of people you've never really met. They're somewhere out in the world. They're not a close connection, and it's not a really super healthy thing. And we're sort of replacing, going and meeting the people in your town, in your neighborhood, in your real life space with these weird, connections like that. Because like, yeah, I love that. I love the idea we live in a confirmation bias universe.
But think about it like this: like what an AI could, if an AI were to create the space for the conversation, it could limit entry into a room based on ideological diversity. That is, it could create a space and invite a bunch of people that are intellectually and ideologically diverse, and says, "Okay, you guys are all in this," and so it can, in and of itself, be able to kind of dismantle echo chambers. It could just not allow echo chambers by just gating access to certain conversations.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny you mentioned that too, because that's another aspect of something we touched on before that, people feel like even doing that becomes like a both sides ism argument. You're platforming this person that has bad ideas by inviting them to the room and that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that like another angle of why this is a little bit different. By the way, I don't think anything here is all that novel. I feel we're just like discovering common sense with
Right.
with the platform here. It's just like if you have a conversation with somebody, that can't necessarily go viral to now a billion people. That isn't the case. If you want an idea to go viral, you have to speak it to somebody, and that person has to speak it to a bunch of other people. And that idea actually has to survive impact with the real world. It can't just be a beautifully packed kind of like delivery that scales on this platform. This
It's my
platform is
it's
for
my hot
conversation.
take.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You're asking about how we're thinking to scale it. So we're doing it in different ways. At the moment, we're still in the Israel-Palestine space, so we're trying to just like do a really good job there. And obviously, like in the U.S., when I first started thinking about creating spaces for conversation, it was 2012, 2013, even about Israel-Palestine. But at that point, I thought Israelis and Palestinians, they don't want to have a conversation with one another. I shouldn't spend time doing that. Since then, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has globalized. Now everybody has an opinion, and I feel like we could even probably just reach a billion people just on top of that conflict alone. So our presence is strong in the U.S., right? But I do think it's important to have Israelis and Palestinians in the conversation very often. So we're certainly starting with a lot of Americans, and one of the ways that we reach them is through YouTube. So we have a fairly strong presence on YouTube with respect to this conflict. We started many years ago, just my partners and I. One of our projects is we go around Israel and the West Bank and just videotape people. We just ask questions of people in the street and we videotape their response. That's been going on now strong for many years. So we have like hundreds of thousands of views on a monthly basis. Right now, all these questions, all these, everything is going into the app and also helping to kind of like guide the AI in certain ways. So people on YouTube will be able to discover these things and kind of like funnel into the app. But also we have some of our conversations start out on YouTube with like big names. We have Norman Finkelstein coming up, many activists in the West Bank, some in Gaza, many Israeli activists, some working on different types of solutions, the federation solution, the confederation solution, one state, two state, 17 states. Everybody's coming up with all these different things. Sometimes we start the conversations on YouTube so that we live stream them and then people can find us this way. And afterwards, we do after parties on the platform. So people can come in and then hop on different rooms and have conversations in those rooms. So that's kind of the way that we've done it so far. Very soon, we're starting a very interesting Twitter strategy where basically you could just do like an at head on. So head on is the name of the platform, at head on AI. And it'll create a template for a conversation between you and a certain person and an invitation to come to the app and have this conversation. We can drive registrations. You can even choose to put that behind a paywall. People want to pay $5 or $10 to see these two giants collide or whatever, and all of that money will go to charity, a charity that both sides agree on. So you can come and speak, confront one another for good. So those are some of the strategies that we're using right now.
And so, what's the best way for people to learn more? I think it sounds like YouTube might be the place where there's the most activity that's public, right?
Yeah, you can just like find our newsletter on headon.ai and our wait list. So get on headon.ai. Then we'll send you an email with everything you need to know. And also I'm at Adam at headon.ai. If people have questions, thoughts, ideas, feedback, anything.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate that. Adam Becker, thank you so much for making time for our show again.
David, it was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.